So today's topic is going to cover 3 records that I think are the best ones to demo or audition a system. So when I say audition, I guess I could mean a couple of things. One is if you have some friends over and, here's the thing. Most of us who are into hi-fi, into vinyl, have dedicated spaces, right? Typically our network of friends in family are aware of this, right? And when they come over, sometimes, well, probably all the time, you want them to come in and like check out whatever record that you're excited about. But if they're not a vinyl collector, if they're not a audiophile type person, they may begrudgingly come in. But sometimes you actually do have friends who want to come and check out your system. And typically, when that happens, especially if it's somebody who you haven't had over yet, hasn't listened to your setup, you want to wow them, right? That's one of the reasons why I think probably all of us are in this game is because we want everybody to think that we're like, I don't know, authorities on whatever genre it is that you collect, whatever equipment that you have. You kind of want to show it off. So I wanted to cover this idea of like, what are the records that you pull, that you go for immediately first? And when I was thinking about this the other day, it occurred to me that I always play the same records. And in fact, I think there was one time somebody came over and they heard a record that I guess I'd played for them before and I didn't realize it. And they're like, you have like thousands of records here. Why don't you play me something different? And it occurred to me that I often pick the same records because I want to impress and I want to show off some aspect of my system. And few people are going to appreciate, say, the rarity of some random record that they probably haven't heard of, and so it becomes difficult, right? You want to pick something that's accessible but also sort of highlights the best of your room or the best of your setup. So anyway, all of that being said, 3 records that I most frequently go to if I want to audition my system. And I guess the other way to think about it, I suppose, is if you were going to audition, say, new speakers or somebody else's system to hear how something sounds, you want to probably pick the same stuff. And I'm going to actually cover some of the reasons why with these 3 releases or these 3 albums. So the 3 categories that I want you to think about and that I think about when I think about these individual albums, the first one is familiarity. So you want to pick something that is familiar to either yourself, if you're auditioning, say, speakers that you might want to buy, or familiar to the guest who you may have come over, because you don't want to put them in a situation where they're listening to free jazz just because it's a record that you happen to like and they're going to hate. You probably want to give them something that they're at least somewhat familiar with rather than something that's too obscure. So familiarity, that's the first one. The second one is, element is dynamics. And so I personally like to showcase sort of the ability to hear the very sort of soft or like low register stuff, as well as the very high and kind of all the that runs the gamut of all the dynamics from very soft to very it's very loud. And so that's something that I think is particularly impressive when I listen to somebody's setup. And then the third one is going to be detail. So sonic detail and I would say stereo separation. And actually I'm going to kind of combine those 2 things because I happen to think that that an album that has particularly great stereo separation is also going to have a lot of detail around the individual instruments. And so it just so happens that I have one record that sort of covers that gamut. So those are the 3 categories that I want to talk about. I have one record to address for each of them. One of these records you're going to know right off the bat. I'll cover that one first. The other 2 you might not, or if you do know them, you might not necessarily come to the conclusion that these are great records to audition with. So that's what we're going to cover. All right, so the first one that I want to cover, and I'm going to have to apologize in advance because you know this album, I've already covered this album in a previous video that I made, but that is Miles Davis's Kind of Blue. This one happens to be the UHQR version. I personally think that the original pressing even could satisfy this requirement of familiarity. So for me personally, when I'm going to go and audition, whether it's speakers, a turntable, whatever it is, any type of equipment, I want to have something that I am intimately familiar with. And there's no album that I know better than Miles Davis's Kind of Blue. I know it backwards and forwards. I've heard it so many times. It was one of the, the first jazz albums that I purchased. I was exposed to this album even earlier than that. And so therefore, like, you know, when I made this shootout video with 4 or 5 different editions, it was easy for me to hear the differences because I'm so familiar with the album. So if you're going to go into a hi-fi shop and audition speakers, have them put on an album that you personally are very familiar with, so that you can hear the difference. Because if it's an album you've never heard, if it's one of these CDs or LPs that is specifically engineered to showcase sonic differences and it's not actually a legitimate album, of course you're going to be impressed, but you're not really going to be able to know how that setup is going to treat the music that you actually like to listen to. And so for me, when I go elsewhere, I like to hear Kinda Blue because that is something that can impress me, because I know immediately if it sounds better than what it does on my setup at home. So the other reason why this is an important one from a familiarity standpoint is if you have people coming over to your house and all you have is jazz like I do, you want to give them something that they've heard before. And the reason why is really this. Most people who are not in this crazy, obsessive world that at least I live in and maybe some of you live in, most people don't listen to music in any type of high quality sort of playback system, right? So most people are listening to music through earbuds. I'm not talking about nice headphones. We're talking about like earbuds or Beats by Dre or something, you know, that produces bad sound or produces sound badly. Or they're listening through an Alexa device, you know, Google Home. They're listening it into the car, on the radio. Most people do not have nice setups, or they think that they do because they have a surround sound system attached to their TV, but it's not really good for like actually listening to to albums and music. It's more for like bass and like effects and stuff while watching TV. So generally speaking, you want to pick something that is familiar to the audience in order to really showcase that music in its best possible way. Because if they're hearing music for the first time, they're not going to know the difference between that and how it might sound on their terrible setup that they have at home. So it's good to give them something that is familiar. Now, here's the thing. I know other people out there, they collect other genres besides just jazz. So if you have something that you can showcase to them that also sounds good in its original form, or, you know, reissue or something like that, like, I don't know, if the person's a Led Zeppelin fan, give them, you know, a Led Zeppelin album. I don't know. But obviously don't pick something that, you know, that doesn't have great sonics, and that should just kind of go without saying. And by and large, most of the stuff on the radio does not sound great even on a nice setup, but there are certainly examples of new artists who actually do, who put a lot of attention into their music, and so it sounds great whether you're hearing it on the radio or you're hearing it on LP. And I am referring to pop artists as well. There's definitely artists who put a lot of attention into it. So anyway, familiarity to yourself and familiarity to your audience. For me, that is Miles Davis's Kind of Blue. All right, the next category is dynamics. And the title that I've chosen that satisfies this one best, I think, is Tsuyoshi Yamamoto's Misty. So this is on the Three Blind Mice label. I think I've mentioned this before in another video, but for me, every Three Blind Mice title is audiophile grade. Almost in any version I think that you can get, because anytime they license this stuff, they did it really, really well. This one happens to be a original pressing, a little bit harder to find than this Supercut analog disc by Impex. So this one, I want to say you can get for maybe like $50 or something right now, which is an insane deal, by the way, because it sounds phenomenal. It's a 45 RPM version. And for me, and because it's just not as valuable as the original, if I'm going to go elsewhere and I want to kind of like, you know, say test this album out on somebody else's system, then I'll bring this copy. And certainly if I have folks over, want to play this copy as well. Sounds phenomenal. So the thing that makes this album stand out, like I said, is the dynamics, and especially on the title track, Misty. It starts out with Yamamoto playing piano, and he takes almost like 2 full sort of choruses of the theme, very, very softly and in a very high register on the piano, almost like there's no notes above it. And so it's soft. It's almost in this kind of like stop time sort of thing where there's no rhythm section. It's just him, and he kind of plays and pauses and like comes in when he wants to, and it's very just sort of, I don't know, pleasing and light, and I don't want to say hard to hear, but like soft. Now, towards the end of that second chorus, Isu Fukui's bass comes in, and it's this like very rumbling but still soft kind of thing. And Obara's drums, just brushes really come in, and it all starts to build really over a period of time. And it gets to a point in this song where it really feels like Yamamoto is like just banging, like still playing like a delicate theme, but just pressing those keys so damn hard, and it gets loud. And if you've turned up your volume on your on your amp or on your receiver in order to hear the first part, you're going to be standing up and going across the room and turning it down, because people in the room are going to kind of be like holding their ears. And that's not to say that it's a badly produced album. It's just the dynamics are so broad in this particular track, and really across this album as a whole. And that's a pretty strong statement to say when you consider that this is a piano trio album. So that they're able to sort of pack that much, that many dynamics into this album. So for me, anyway, when people come over, I love pulling this one. I make everybody shut up because I want them to hear what it sounds like, and it's an emotional sounding record as well. So I can say this: I had some folks from the sort of the Instagram community, influencers, if you will, over to hosted them at my house like a couple of years ago, and I pulled out this album, and more than one or two in the room were like, we're gonna go buy that album now because of how good it sounds. So anyway, encourage you to check this one out, especially again on the topic of dynamics. I think it does an amazing job. All right, so the final record that I wanted to share that satisfies that category of stereo separation and sonic detail probably is the one that you're least likely to be familiar with. That title, which I'm going to have a really hard time pronouncing, so forgive me in advance, but it's the LA4, so that is the band, and the title, which you probably can't read because it's frankly like blue against like this cover is just awful to read anyway. I think it's supposed to be Italian. I want to pronounce it in French, but I have no idea how an Italian would pronounce this. So I'm going to do my best, but possibly Pavane pour un Infante Defunte, something like that, because I want to pronounce it the French way, which would be like Pavane pour un enfant Defunte or something. I don't know. So that is what it's called. I'll put the title, up here somewhere, just so you can take a closer look at it. So, who is the LA4? You may have come across their albums in the past at a record store. All their covers are atrocious, for the most part, because what you end up having to look at is like Shelly Manne and Bud Shank, like circa like 1977, with like big glasses and long hair. They look atrocious. But who the LA4 are is Bud Shank, Lorindo Almeida, Ray Brown, and Shelly Manne. So this crew is amazing. Okay, when they came together, they really put out fantastic music. And the funny thing is, a lot of people sleep on the LA4, but there are certain albums, this one included, that are actually worth something. Like there's one I think that's on Concord that I used to have that I picked up for like $5, probably because of the cover, and I flipped it for like 100. So keep an eye out for the LA4, because not in every case, but when you see their stuff, especially on the EastWind label, this one is on the EastWind label, which is a Japanese label, it sounds phenomenal. So one other tell, by the way, for audiophile grade albums, and I'll show you a picture of this, is when they show you the setup in the studio in the actual gatefold. So that is something that Three Blind Mice did. Actually, in fact, in this copy of Misty, you can take a look and see what the setup was in the studio. But basically, they want to demonstrate like this is how we did it, because they're so proud of how it sounds, and it makes sense in this situation. So to the actual music. This one opens with the title track. I'm not going to pronounce it again. And it opens up with just like bells. And it goes from the left channel to the right channel. And it's this kind of like delicate thing that starts off a little like, frenetic or like sparse. And then it starts tapping out like a defined beat. And then the instruments pick up and sort of take it away, especially Bud Shank's flute, as well as Ray Brown's drums, and Ray Brown's bass, And then shortly thereafter, you hear Man come in on brushes doing this, like, I mean, he plays like robotic, and I mean that actually in a good way, because he keeps time like clockwork. He's just like boom, 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 and it sounds really good. He's like slamming the brushes into the snare, and it just sounds amazing. And what occurs to me when I listen to this, first of all, is it gives me chills every time I hear it. But there is so much rich sort of detail around each of the instruments. You know, fingers on bass that you get to hear, and Bud Shank's, you know, breath through the flute. He also plays sax on this, so it isn't just a flute album. But it just, everything about the detail that this recording captures is impressive. And like I said, because of how it goes, sort of sound carries from left to right channel, you really do get a sense of the room. So the classic thing that you're told if it's a good sort of presentation of stereo is you're supposed to be able to close your eyes, and you're supposed to be able to point in the room where the musicians are, and it should not be just left and just right, because those are the two channels. The sound should be blended so that you can hear, you know, the bass maybe over here, maybe even like further away, you know, outside of the speakers, is particularly impressive when music is able to reproduce something like that. And so this is an album that actually does that. You really do get a sense of the room, especially if you close your eyes, and it just sounds fantastic. That opening track I think is particularly impressive. But the thing about this album is there's other great songs here. You have Autumn Leaves. You also have Samba of Orpheus, which is from Black Orpheus, which is going to be in the latest Kraft recordings, One Step, and is a great sounding recording as well. I happen to love that song in particular. And that makes it even more likely that I'm going to pick up this album and listen to it. So this is one, again, that I like to use to impress folks who are coming over, or if I'm going to go over to somebody's house, I like to put this album on and, you know, sort of show them, hey, here's a jazz album that you'll appreciate, especially for those equipment guys. So anyway, those are the three, and those are kind of the three categories that I think about in the albums that I go for. I find myself toting these albums around quite a bit if I'm going to visit friends, and I think that you should check them out. More than that, though, I didn't just do this as a show and tell. I'm actually really interested to hear from others and what they think are the best sounding albums that they would use in this type of context, right? So I know that last year Oscar Peterson's We Get Requests came out on Analog Productions. Phenomenal sounding album, and I just love the presentation, and that is one of those albums that I would probably use to audition. I don't think it would sort of supersede any of the three that I referenced just now, but I'm interested in, you know, which albums do you think are the best albums to audition with, and why, whether it fits one of the categories that I mentioned or maybe some category that I didn't mention. So hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned something. Maybe you haven't seen this LA4 album before, and now you're going to keep an eye out for it. But anyway, thanks for tuning in. Please hit subscribe, and I'll talk to you later.